everyone, and welcome to another episode of Social and Media Matters Talk. Today we have with us Alice Hansborg, VP of Trust and Safety and Content Moderation at Partners Hero. She has a diverse work experience spanning from various industries and roles. Just to share a few names, she has served at Grindr, OpenAI, OkCupid, and she's also a leading voice in the trust and safety industry. I'm so delighted to have you with us today, Alice. And once again, thank you for your time.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Just to clarify, I was a freelancer for OpenAI. I just did a little bit of testing of ChatGPT before it went live, so I wasn't an employee of theirs. I wasn't like a full-time person. I don't want to take credit for any of the work that they've done over there. I just helped out a little bit, but all the rest is accurate and great. And thank you for having me. I'm super happy to be here.
But yeah, even the little contribution that has added to the whole area of trust and safety. So I want to
Yeah.
begin by, so I just want to begin by asking with you about if you can share a bit more about yourself, your work, and the role, how extensively that is going today.
I started my career in trust and safety and tech about 14 years ago. I started out as a frontline content moderator for OkCupid, which is a dating app part of Match Group. It was just supposed to be like a part-time job while I was figuring out what I wanted to do. I had previously been a documentary film editor and wasn't sure I wanted to keep doing that. But I was fascinated by tech and working in tech and specifically trust and safety and customer support. I thought it was so interesting. And so I just kept raising my hand and saying, what else can I do? What else can I do? Give me more. And became their senior director of customer experience after 10 years of being there, working my way up. So I went from employee 20 at the company to really building out a whole trust and safety team and sort of saw through when OkCupid was bought by Match Group, became a public company as part of the same group as Hinge and Tinder and some other big dating apps that everybody knows. And then after 10 years at OkCupid, I was hired to come to Grindr and was there for 3.5 years. And I built out their trust and safety team as well as customer support and user insights, policies. I rewrote the community guidelines, did a whole bunch of stuff. And then, 3 months ago, I came to Partner Hero, so I'm relatively new in this role. I feel like 3 months is the part where you can't say you're brand new anymore, but I'm still getting used to it. Partner Hero is an outsourcing company, or a BPO, so they provide customer support and moderation for a whole bunch of companies that you've heard of and know and love. And Partner Hero was the company that I worked with when I was at Grindr. So I worked with the teams there for 3.5 years, really liked their approach and way of doing things. And when I was looking for what I wanted to do next in my career, I'd spent so long in dating. So I got very, very deep in knowing about online dating and everything to do with that. And so I wanted to go broad and sort of work across the industry, work with a lot of different companies. And so working with a vendor seemed like the perfect fit. And then in addition to, I should say what I do at Partner Hero, shouldn't I? So I'm VP of Trust and Safety and Content Moderation. I'm basically the business lead for that entire line of business. So I oversee everything from sort of pre-sales solutions, launching new programs, operations, everything sort of from beginning to end through the life cycle with partners that has to do with trust and safety or moderation. Then I'm looking into it. And then I've as if I don't have enough else going on for fun on the side, I have a podcast called Trust in Tech, which is about all things trust and safety. And I do a newsletter called Trust and Safety Insider with Ben Whitelaw, who does the Everything Moderation newsletter. And so you can catch me around there as well and on LinkedIn.
I don't know what to say, but yeah, that's incredible, and that's so fantastic to know about your experience and what all and where all you have contributed. I basically want to begin with one of my favorite questions, which I love to ask all the trust and safety professionals out there. So, how do you see the trust and safety landscape growing as an industry with an increasing emphasis on user privacy and security? If you can just throw some light on that.
Yeah, it's been really interesting seeing how trust and safety has changed over the years. I think that's one reason why I love working in this field, is because it really does change. So, over the years since I started, when I first started working in trust and safety, people would report or expect companies to look into like obvious scammers, obvious fake accounts, but there wasn't really a lot of talk or discussion about proactive moderation for things like hate speech. People sort of expected to deal with that on their own and didn't even imagine that companies could or would intervene in those situations. Now, of course, we see a lot of expectation for interventions of all sorts on platforms. And then additionally, obviously, in the last couple of years, we've seen safety regulation be passed. And so that's incredibly new for the industry. We're just starting to see regulation be in effect and enforced. And we're starting to see what happens when companies maybe aren't following the regulation exactly, and countries sort of go and regulators go after the companies, and the companies fight back. And so we're over the next few years, I think the biggest change that we're going to see is like, really, what does that regulation mean? Like in practical terms, what is expected? Because the text of the regulation can be interpreted in any number of different ways, and it's through these legal battles that we find out like, actually, what do they mean? Like, what are the real practical means? So that's one thing that's really interesting. And then, you mentioned privacy as well. We've seen regulation with privacy come just a little bit before. And what's so interesting is privacy regulation and safety regulation don't always match, and every person working in trust and safety has to balance privacy and safety. I did that a lot at Grindr, serves the LGBTQ community, and to that community, privacy is safety. And so, that's a very, very interesting sort of landscape there. And then the other way that I think that things are changing is, 2024 is the year of global elections. And so there's a lot happening with global elections and sort of how people are dealing with election integrity. And we'll see what comes after this year. I think, again, like the rise of generative AI, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, that's affecting a lot. And so we have this sort of like strange time in trust and safety where there's so many new things, and we haven't seen huge change from any of them yet, but we're all sort of like on the edge of our seats. Like, what's going to happen with elections? What's going to happen with AI? What's going to happen with regulation? I don't know. So yeah, we'll check in a year or two maybe and see.
Totally. And yes, I hear this a lot from a lot of trust and safety professionals now across the globe because, rightly said by you, major elections are happening this year. India is also going through elections right now. Currently, we're going through our election phase. And we see that, how misinformation, fake news are the most hot topics to be discussed, with also adding to content moderation and what guidelines have been specifically been informed to the big tech companies. Also, how the government is following certain rules and regulations with the exchange of information online, and also the consumption of information that is being done by the users right now. So very to look into, right? You know what you talked about, the practicality of it, right? User safety. I think so. My line of questions are completely around those themes today when I talk to you and as I speak to you as well. And I want to add to this by asking you another question. On the area where I look into your extensive experience, where you talk about customers, especially. So, what strategies I want to understand? What strategies have you found most effective in fostering a culture of trust and safety? Both if I look into internally among the team members and also externally with the users, because you have extensively worked in the customer experience segment. If you can just share a bit more about that.
I love that question because I think that the same principles apply when you're talking to the company internally, your teams internally, and when you're speaking with customers. And also when you're speaking publicly, like when I'm doing this interview with you or speaking on LinkedIn, like it's all the same. And I think that comes down to being as authentic as possible, sharing as much as possible, being as transparent as possible, and talking about why. So often people miss the why part of things and they will just say, let's say you're rolling out a new feature. It's important to talk about what it is, what it does, how it's going to keep people safe, but also maybe talk about the things that you thought about that you didn't do and why. Like, why this particular feature? What were all the discussions that went into designing it? What different advocacy groups and civil society groups did you consult with during the design of the process? What user interviews did you do? That all gives credibility to whatever the new policy or the new feature or whatever it is that you did. I think that people often think that trust and safety changes on platforms are done quickly and without thought. And there's always compromise that has to happen in the world of trust and safety. I think Charlotte Wilner, who's head of the Trust and Safety Professional Association, says that trust and safety is actually trade-offs and sadness. It's so true. Like there's always trade-offs. And when there's trade-offs, then people are critical because they didn't get exactly what they wanted because there were compromises on both sides. And so I think it's really important to be as clear as possible about all the thought that went behind it, because inevitably there is. And then, similarly with internal teams, when you ask people to do something, tell them why, tell them what you've thought about, tell them your own experiences with doing similar things. I've been lucky enough to have sort of worked my way up in my career. And so not everybody I've managed, but most people that I've managed, I've done their exact job myself just a few years before. And then sort of I hire my backfill and move on to the next thing and just keep doing that. And so, just sort of talking to people and saying like, hey, look, I've been in your shoes. I know what it's like. This is what it was like for me. And then give people context as well. So for users, but also especially for trust and safety teams see terrible things all day long. And it's really easy to get into a frame of mind where you think that everything's bad all the time. And so as a leader, it can be really helpful to contextualize that and to talk to people and sort of say like, okay, we saw this big spike in complaints about a certain thing, but 99% of people who used it didn't experience anything bad, and you're seeing the 1%. And similarly with users saying like, okay, sometimes you might have a negative experience, but the majority of people on this platform want to have a good time. They're very respectful, like they're here to have positive discourse. Please report the people who you don't. I think that sort of context setting can be helpful too, because as humans, we're programmed to pay much more attention to the bad things than to the good things. And so we can experience lots of good, and one bad thing happens and all the good goes out the window and you forget about it completely. So try to keep that in mind as well.
Yes, and also I think so it has become more critical now because when we see trust and safety growing as well, there are a lot of responsibilities that are adding with respect to tech, this user safety, privacy, the design part of it. So that is also bringing a lot of responsibilities on the shoulders of the professionals who are working in the space now, because that is what is being followed largely by the companies, of what the trust and safety professionals are talking about. That is why big companies, I see how they are also establishing trust and safety units, especially the tech companies, and also the involvement that needs to have of different stakeholders. When you talked about parents, educators, involvement of civil society organizations, that's so relevant now, because I think so some of the missing links can only be fixed once we involve everyone over there. I'm just hopeful, keeping the fingers crossed that this goes this way, and we are able to kind of put more of efforts into trust and safety while technology is growing as well. So another question for you that I want to ask you, you talked about customer experiences, the safety, the privacy. So how do you balance the need for robust trust and safety measures with maintaining a positive user experience and minimizing friction for users?
That's a really hard one. I'm not a product manager. I'm a policy person and operations manager. I've worked with product teams. I've set product roadmaps and priorities, but the minimizing friction is like a product manager, thing. And I often would be on the other side of things being like, what's wrong with a little friction if it makes things more safe? So maybe I'm not the best one to ask, but I think that ultimately it really depends on the users and what's important to the culture of the people on the platform. So as an example, I've talked a little bit before about the tension between privacy and safety. There's also tension between safety and user expression or freedom of speech. And every person who's working in trust or, strategizing for trust and safety, trying to balance all of these things, is going to have to compromise in some of these areas. But how you do that and how you minimize friction for your users will depend on what's appropriate for the platform. So as an example, a platform like Blue Sky or Meta, where it's all about sort of public posts that people read, might want to lean a little bit more towards freedom of expression, because expression is like the product. Like the whole point of the product is what people say and how they say it. And so allowing more speech makes sense. For a dating platform, it's not really about your expression, it's about who you are. And so then, you have other maybe you want to index a little bit more on how you make sure that somebody's staying on topic, meaning like talking about themselves and less about the world. For platforms that are for children, like Roblox, for example, you probably want to think about safety in a very different way because you have minors using your platform. And so maybe free expression everywhere for everybody is not so appropriate, or it's really limited in ways that would feel stifling on Blue Sky. And so I think just designing the balance between safety, privacy, free expression, depending on the users and what they need is like how you can get the most buy-in. But there's all like, again, it's always a compromise. You always want to have some of all of those things.
Yeah, the tricky part was basically to kind of get an overview of the product side as well. We can have that element added, but that's totally fine. Just giving the public policy perspective over there.
Mhm.
Totally, but this also kind of puts me to ask you another aspect of it is that I want to understand, in your opinion, while you talk about all these elements and all these factors as well. So, what are some of the key indicators or warning signs that suggest a company may need to invest more in its trust and safety efforts? Or if I say, like, some organizations are also thinking of establishing one. So what key indicators do you think one should need to abide by or need to keep in mind while following the trust and safety as a group?
I think the most important thing is to listen to your users. So see what they're saying, see what complaints are coming in, see what issues are happening. In order to listen to your users, obviously, you have to have a way to listen to your users. You have to have a way for them to give you feedback. Sometimes, I've seen startups and small companies say, we don't have a trust and safety problem, everything's fine. It's because they don't have a report button. So they don't have a way for users to tell them that something's wrong, or they haven't hit a certain scale yet. And so the percentage of bad actors is still very small because the user base is very, very small. So just because you aren't hearing anything now doesn't mean that it's not coming. So also don't get lulled into a false sense of security. But really make sure that you have like a voice of the customer program, that you're looking across all channels. So customer support feedback, user reports, app reviews, even like social media, like Reddit or other places if people are talking about it. It's really, really helpful to get a holistic sense. And sometimes people will talk about trust and safety issues without knowing that it's trust and safety necessarily. So, pay attention to all kinds of bad experiences and like how people report them and react to them. And then I also encourage folks, even if they can need to do it just casually and unofficially, look at benchmarks for what other companies are doing. So look at companies that are similar sort of format, similar user base, similar kinds of different areas where users can interact with each other, create user generated content, and see what, at what point, like their growth cycle, have they run into issues? What lessons can you learn from how other people didn't do it well? What sort of features do they have? What does good look like? I think that's one of the hardest things for a lot of trust and safety leaders is not every company puts out transparency reports. That's changing with regulation. So benchmarking will be a lot easier, I think, in the near future. But it's hard to know sometimes if you're doing a good job or not without having information on how other people are doing and what their metrics look like. So yeah, network and reach out to other people working in trust and safety as much as possible and just try to get a sense of where you are compared to other folks as well.
Feedback is something was also continuously going in back of our mind that user feedback, be it critical, whatever users talk about it, the critique from the users as well needs to be well taken by the companies when it's especially for the product, right? It's only when we can talk about the betterment of it, enhancing the tool, and that brings in more of trust and safety because it's all about user. user safety over there.
Mhm.
So rightly mentioned over there about the feedback and the critiques and the critical feedback that the company needs to take into and listen to them. So important and so relevant over here. And with this, I switched to asking about when we spoke about generative AI, reflecting upon that. With the rise of artificial intelligence, generative AI is now that we are, is so much talked about. How do you see these technologies, especially in the Gen AI world now, influencing the trust and safety landscape, particularly in terms of content moderation and user safety? If you can talk about a little more on this so that the viewers who are watching this episode of our Social and Media Matters talk, they know that how important and how thoughtful one needs to be while we look into the trust and safety landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot is going to change in a lot of different ways. So um, there's two aspects of it. There's generative AI to create more content. So that's something that a lot of people are keeping an eye on. For example, we just saw a bunch of companies get together and talk about how to mitigate the creation of child sexual abuse material from generative AI. That's like making it exponentially easier to create this horrific imagery. And so that's certainly something that trust and safety teams need to keep an eye out for is, it's just easier than ever to create deep fakes or, any number of like text content around election integrity, or, there's just like all the things that we've had Photoshop for decades. There's been fake images for a long time, but it's just so much easier now and so much more realistic and so fast for anybody to create for anything. So I think we'll just see a lot more content happening, and that'll be interesting to see how it changes. On the other side of things, there's the promise of generative AI to be used for trust and safety teams to do their jobs better. And that's something that I'm really, really interested in. We've seen a few folks talk about it, notably Dave Wilner. I think like in general, my prediction, I will see, is a lot of the sort of very easy, repetitive kind of content moderation work that hasn't been automated yet will be automated by large language models, and that a lot of policy enforcement will be happening first through sort of cheap and easy machine learning models, second through more expensive and extensive large language models and generative AI, and then third through the even more expensive layer of humans. That's going to take some adjusting. It's going to probably be fairly disruptive to the countries that have a lot of people working in those areas and those lower level jobs. And I don't think enough people are talking about that. On the other hand, it can unlock the possibility for some pretty bespoke, custom, very specific moderation rules that a human would never be able to remember. But if you can feed it all to a machine, this giant policy document of 100 pages, the machine will be able to remember it all perfectly. So it could reduce bias. It could create in languages that are underrepresented, often in content moderation and trust and safety. It could increase bias if those models aren't trained properly or the policies aren't written carefully enough and somebody sloppily throws it out. So I think those are some of the main ways that I think that it's going to change. But we'll see. We're very, very early stages with that tech right now.
two points that struck my mind is that we need to have more conversations. Somewhere it is growing. People are talking about it, but with the level the technology is advancing, I think so. And now that we have large learning models, artificial intelligence, machine learning, in that capacity, like you talked about the layers, right? We need to also look into the layers of security over there when we talk about trust and safety. Also, we need to look into the different layers of approachability, how it is being approached, how seriously it is being taken or considered. That needs to be echoed across the globe. It's not becoming only an issue for some specific zones, as part of the world. But how it is going to the third world countries, how it is going to the first world countries, that also needs to be addressed. And of course, adopting the best practices over there is something needs to be thoughtful about. And totally agree with as what you shared, how we need to have more folks also involved into this industry now, since we look at we look at this as a one of the critical industries in the coming years, especially with AI and generative AI. CSAM content is being created. So like we
Mhm.
need to think through the level of security and safety from a child's perspective, from a teenage perspective, from a user perspective, putting that into different categories over there. And with this, I want to ask you about on the aspects on the lines of collaboration, because there are agencies, there are civil society organizations, there are big tech companies. How do we look into the collaborations between trust and safety teams, product development, and other departments within a company? And if I talk about your role, which is a bit critical as well. um, how do you facilitate effective communication and collaboration across these teams as well? So, larger context and your team context.
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is so important. I think there's something that we can learn from cybersecurity teams, where they constantly say security is everyone's responsibility. And that's something that I think that we need to adopt in trust and safety as well. Like, user safety is everybody's responsibility. I might be the trust and safety person at a company, but that doesn't mean that everybody else doesn't have to think about trust and safety. It just means that I know a few more of the details and can maybe think like a bad guy a little bit more than everybody else and poke apart their plans. But everyone needs to keep it front and center, because it's in the name trust. If users don't trust your platform, then they're not going to stay there, and that's something that everybody needs to be concerned about. And similarly, I'm on the vendor side now, not at a platform with product people, but there's a lot of customer support, customer service people who aren't necessarily doing trust and safety work, and such crossover with trust and safety teams. Like, there's so many times where there's safety issues or de-escalation that needs to happen, or like little red flags of like, oh, I should escalate this to somebody, this seems pretty serious. It's so important to sort of train everybody on and tell them what to recognize and how to think about things. And so I think like my biggest advice for folks, sort of practical advice, is in two stages. The first is to try to befriend somebody in every single department at your company as high level as you can, or like at the peer level of wherever you are, and teach them everything about trust and safety. It doesn't have to be like info dump forever, but just like have coffee chats with them, talk to them about what you're thinking about, talk to them about the trends that you're seeing, see where you can be helpful to them as well, so it's not just one-sided. But if you have allies at your company who care about user safety and care about the same sort of principles and human rights and other issues that you do, then they'll speak up for trust and safety in team meetings when you're not there. So if there's a product development meeting and there's no trust and safety representative there, but there's a PM who really likes you and is always thinking about trust and safety because you've talked to them about it, then they'll raise their hand and be like, oh, we should dig into this a little bit more. We should let's go find Alice and ask her what she thinks. So just doing that unofficially, I think, is really, really helpful. And then the second phase is to do that officially. So if you are the head of trust and safety, if you're like me and you're a VP level, then you have a fair amount of influence in the company, and you can have, safety council, and you can have somebody from every department officially on the safety council, and you can have weekly is probably too much. You can have like monthly meetings, checking in, talking about all things safety, hearing about what other people are working on, keeping everybody like completely in sync, and then have checklists and checks and balances, especially around product development and launch and design. And so when people start to think about something that might touch user generated content, user communications, anything public facing, anything where people can type into a box, then make sure that it goes through safety by design checklist and review, and make sure that the safety council kind of reviews it and okays it before it goes live. So you don't have to start with all of the official checklists if you're a small company. But yeah, just making sure that everybody's sort of in sync with what you're thinking about, and giving that structure where it's needed.
You actually answered my last question, which I wanted to ask you, but that's so fantastic. Giving the advices out there as well. So I just want to quickly wrap up, putting some few highlight points. Is a user safety is really important. If you are in an organization where you think that user safety is not being taken care of, please speak about it. Having a trust and safety unit within your organization, if you have a big company, talk about it. Also, learn from the best practices. Alice has put out a good best practices for us to adopt, that companies can look into. Talk about it to your peer members. Do not let anybody feel that they are being unheard. Create councils, share opinions, listen to them, make it anonymous. But trust and safety is important for all of us. If we do not feel safe in the online spaces, I think so. Then we lack a lot within our product, the policies or regulations. So we need to be thoughtful. We need to keep all these points in mind. And with this, thank you, Alice, for giving your time, wonderful inputs, insights, and sharing them with us. To all the viewers who are watching this episode of Social and Media Matters Talk, please, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to drop it in the comment section. I'm sure Alice will take a look and give the best of best information that she can provide with. And we will try to comment and revert back to you with the best of our knowledge. So thank you so much, Alice, once again. It was so wonderful to speak to you today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you for all the great work you do advocating for safety. It's so important.